And we are live.
We are
Good
afternoon,
afternoon,
everybody.
everybody.
Welcome to the
Welcome to the
show.
show.
I
I
am Mark.
am Mark
Welcome
for
to our ServerPress
ServerPress
Office Hours
Office
episode.
Hours episode
Tips, tricks,
6
and
and
troubleshooting,
troubleshooting
episode
episode
4.
4.
I'm coming to
Coming to
you
you
live from
live
Redlands, California,
from a cool little co-working space
from
called
a
the
cool little
Orange
co-working
Space.
space called the Orange. Greg is actually here
Actually,
with me today, so we are both
we
coming to
are
you
both
from the
members
same
from the same
place.
place.
Um,
Um,
Anyway,
anyway,
I'm Mark. I'm the
I'm the
operations manager
operations
for
manager for
ServerPress,
ServerPress,
and
and
really excited to get going. And
going.
Greg, who are
Greg,
you?
who are you? I'm Greg Franklin with ServerPress also, and I usually handle support.
Oh,
And
and I
I
hear that I have an
hear that
echo.
I
I
have
wonder if I
an
have the
echo.
wrong thing turned on, wrong microphone turned on here. One moment. We have to turn the volume down because we're in the same
Because
room.
we're in the same
So give me just
room.
a second here.
Just a second. Is this any better?
Is this any better?
Still have echo?
Still have echo?
Anyone?
Anyone?
Right. Hopefully we don't.
Hopefully we don't.
Anyway,
Anyway,
that was and hello. Not better. I'm sorry. I wonder where we get to that echo. Maybe just the way it is. Okay. Hopefully when Greg talks, because Greg's going to be doing a lot of talking, we won't miss that.
Go ahead, Greg.
Go ahead, Greg. Say something.
Let's find out if I echo.
That's strange. That's strange. It's the same stuff that I do every week.
Mine is muted.
That's really smart. Yeah, because Greg and I are in the same room. So I will mute my mic. Greg was okay, so I'll mute my mic, and you will hear me coming over Greg's mic, hopefully.
All right. So hopefully that will solve it. That was a good solution. I don't know why I didn't think of that. Because I'm sure that that's the problem. So back to the show. Greg, did you introduce yourself?
I did.
Okay. Well, great. So we'll get right to the news. Now you can't make anything out. Okay.
You better switch back on.
Okay, I'm going to switch on my. This is and clearly it's going well. So I'm going to turn on my mic now, and then.
Okay, we're going to try this. This is probably really good, I bet you. So, ServerPress news. We have some ServerPress news. I'm going to get to that. I bet you guys can all hear me fine now. We have a brand new release candidate, 3.9.2, that is out. We showed a little bit of it last week in the demonstration that we did, and that was put out to premium users over the weekend. And then, was it last night, Greg? Last night, Greg actually put out the release candidate for limited users. So you will find that in your account section on your ServerPress page. So if you go to account and downloads, you'll find it there. If you're brand new and have never downloaded desktop server, then you would go in and add it to your cart, and you'll find it there in your account section once you create an account. So that's really exciting. It has a bunch of really cool features. There's a new clean import plugin, which we have had the clean import plugin for a while, but this one actually does some pretty cool things in the way that it handles certain files and gives you a little bit more control over what you're doing. And the feature that I like the best is Steve snuck in a multiple delete feature. So when you have multiple sites that you want to delete, rather than having to delete them one at a time, you can delete them in multiples, which is pretty cool. This is a release candidate. we have had really good feedback from our customers so far. Very few issues reported. However, if you do download it and use it, I would recommend, if you run into a problem, that you fill out a bug report. And you can do that by going to our bug report page, which is serverpress.com/bug report. I'm going to put that in the chat window right now. And the thing about the bug report is that is strictly a bug report. So keep in mind that we are not going to address it like we would address a standard support issue with a tracking number and everything. We will track it internally in our GitHub repository where we are assigning separate bug report of it. But any bugs that you find, we would like to know about, because as you all know, we like to put out quality software, and it's really important to us, and we appreciate any help that you give us on that. 1 out of 10 mark for the view. What that means. I just posted the link here for the bug report. And so that is the news with ServerPress. We have some cool stuff coming out with WP SiteSync in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be making announcements there as well. Today we're going to be covering, having a discussion of desktop server tips, tricks, and troubleshooting. And so this is the part where Greg gets to start doing some demo stuff. So I am going to mute myself, and hopefully you'll be able to hear him. And I'll tell Greg to take it away just a second here. There you go. Go for it.
So I thought we would cover today some tips and tricks and troubleshooting when it comes to all the different aspects of desktop server. And we kind of broken these up into things like installation. So if you're a first-time person installing a desktop server, there's some problems you might run into or some issues that we can help with. And I'll kind of cover the ones that we see the most. And then also importing and then exporting and deployments. And even probably in a future show, we might cover some aspects of the database and some of the DSCLI, what that plugin can do for you, things like that. So I thought the first thing we should talk about is the installation. So when you go ahead and visit our site and sign up, whether that be for the limit or the premium, an account is currently set up for you, and you can go into that account by visiting serverpress.com/account. And in there, you're going to find things like your purchase information, the invoice. You can actually create an invoice and print it if you'd like to. You're going to find the downloads tab, which has, if you're using premium, it's going to show a list of the premium version. It's going to, if you're limited, it's going to show the limited. Right now, you're going to find the release candidate for 3.9.2 in there, and you can click on that and download that version to upgrade to and try out if you'd like. It is a release candidate, so there's still possibility of there being some bugs, but I can tell you right now, we've had nothing but good response and feedback so far on it, which is fantastic. But we would love for even more people to try it, because everybody's environment is different. So there can be things that you have on your system that's different than what's on mine, and Mark's, and maybe that causes an issue. Or maybe you are trying a new theme or a new plugin that might conflict somehow with ours. So we're always looking for feedback on that kind of thing so that we can resolve those issues for you. The other thing that is in there is a profile tab. So if you wanted to go in and change your email, where our email notices come to you and things like that, you can change your password for your account, all the kind of profile stuff that goes on there. So in there, after you've downloaded desktop server, the first thing you'll want to do on whether Windows or Mac is uncompress it. And on a Mac, you just double click it and it uncompresses. On a Windows, you might have to right mouse click and extract all, or if you're using something, there's quite a few different zip programs like WinZip or something like that. Again, you would just right mouse click and run uninstall, unzip, and it's going to uncompress. After it's done uncompressing, there's going to be an install link, basically an icon. Double click that, it's going to open up. On a Mac, it's going to ask you for your system password because it's got to go ahead and it needs some administrative rights to be able to do that. On Windows, you're already an administrator, so it's going to go ahead and start being able to install for you. So at this point, you may see an error. So an error that happens quite often is a port 80 error. Desktop server uses, their web server component uses port 80. And port 80 is a standard web server port. And so some other things can also use port 80. In the past, Skype was using port 80. The good news is Skype's newest version now does not use port 80. It's gone away from that. But if you're on an older Windows, for example, Windows 7, and you're using an older version of Skype, you may see a situation where it's using port 80. And if it is, it's actually very easy to resolve. You can go into the Skype settings, and there's a checkbox that says that it's using port 80, and when you uncheck it, it changes to a different port. So it changes to like 2233 or something like that. And you can actually change it to whatever port you want to at that point. But in the new Windows 10, you're not going to see this. It's not an issue with Skype. With another thing that can use port 80 is Windows has its own web server. It's called IIS, or is it Information Internet Services? Something like that. And better known as IIS, and it uses port 80 also. But almost no one uses this, but it's interesting. Windows, when it does some updates, we've found that in cases where Windows 10 has done an update, it's turned this service on. And that can cause, when you do an installation, this can cause an error saying that port 80 is being currently used. So again, an easy fix, you just go into your control panel and into the administrative tools and into services and turn that service off. You can set it to manual and then hit stop, and it'll never be a thorn in your side again, and you'll be able to run the installer and it won't give you that error. I also want to mention that if you already had desktop server installed and Windows 10 did this update and turned on IIS, you could possibly, when you try to visit a site that you've created, you could possibly get a 404 error, or sometimes you can get just a completely white screen. And that's what can cause, that's what IIS can cause. Some other things that can cause port 80 is things like VPNs. We've seen that kind of cause that. Some printer software can sometimes use port 80. And the easiest way to kind of find these obscure, weird port 80 issues is there is a tool. If you go up to our docs.serverpress.com and do a search for cports, there's a tool that you can download called cports. And if you install it and run it, it will show you what is running on what ports. And you're looking again for port 80 or port 443. Port 443 is the secure side of that. And those are the two you're looking to make sure that nothing else is using those. And if they are, we want to track those down and turn those off so that desktop server can run. We are asked once in a while if desktop server can use a different port. Unfortunately, at this time, it cannot. It needs to use port 80. So that's everything on that. Other things that can happen when installing is antivirus. So different kinds of antiviruses. Antiviruses overall can actually cause issues for desktop server because antiviruses have a tendency to go very low level. They connect actually into the OS and make changes to the operating system, and that can be a problem for desktop server. I understand the antivirus is trying to do its job, but in some ways it actually breaks things, and this can cause a problem for us. Things like when we're doing an installation, you may get an error or notice from your from the antivirus saying that there is a malicious piece of software being installed. And actually, there's not. It's just one of the particular pieces, one of the plugins that we use, DSCLI, does appear to look like it might be a virus to an antivirus, but it's not, so it's a false positive. Things like that. What else in installation? What else can be issues? So the installation can take a little bit of time because there is a lot of files involved. So don't be surprised if your installation can take up to 30, 35 minutes. It is installing all those files involved. Normally it's not anything to do with your computer or as far as it's just there's a lot to it. After an installation is done, the first thing we recommend if you're using, we do have a document called Getting Started. You might take a look at that. The first thing we want you to do is go ahead and create a site and see if you can go ahead and create a site. Do you have a question?
You froze for a second.
You froze for a second.
Oh, okay. That's fine. So a couple other things. After you do an installation, there's a couple other small things that might show up. One of them is after you've created this site, if you should happen to go and try to, there's a button called the Sites button. It's going to display what websites that you've created. And if that button should happen to be grayed out and not active, that usually can be caused because in the preferences file, the default browser was named wrong. An example of that could be in the preferences file, it could say Google Chrome instead of just Chrome. So that can cause that button to be grayed out. Let's see, what else in installation can be problems. In most cases, installations actually go very easily. So that's the good news. So I guess we'll go on to import at this point, unless there's any questions. I think I'll look over to Mark and see if Mark sees anybody has any questions about installations.
None yet.
None yet. Very good. Okay. I think most people don't have too much trouble getting it installed. It does seem to install without too much problems. So importing, we have that clean import plugin, and we do recommend you use it. Most turn that on, and the clean import plugin does a lot of things. So when you import a site, that site is usually coming from a live host, and the host can sometimes add files to it that's specific to their situation, and that's one of the ones that's called an htaccess file. And that htaccess file can contain a whole bunch of things that's specific to their server. And those things are not going to work locally. They're specific to their server. So one of the things Clean Import does is it renames your htaccess file and writes a generic one in place so that it works really well with ours. And sometimes also the WP config file, which is WordPress's configuration file, can have a bunch of things added to it and defines. And what we do is we go ahead and rename it and write a default WP config file also. It's also recommended that you don't have a caching plugin or a security in plugin. Those can cause issues. So what Clean Import does now is it actually will rename those and basically deactivate those kinds of plugins. And there's a bunch of other plugins that in the settings page of Clean Import you can take a look at that we turn off, some because it helps speed things up, some because there can be issues when you're doing it, and that's what those kind of things, Clean Import prevents those kinds of things. And we keep adding new features to it all the time to make things even smoother. Recently, which 392 solves the problem, Duplicator, which is one of the plugins that we can take a file as an import and bring into Desktop Server, they renamed the WP config file. And that surprised us, surprised our users. They also had moved the database to a different folder, named it differently also. So this can cause a problem. It can make it so that Desktop Server can't find the database. You'll get an error. And now we have added into the 392 version, and when you're running clean import, it goes ahead and checks, and it renames the WP config file back to the correct name, and it moves the database into the root and names it database.sql. And so now it should import correctly. If you are using Duplicator Pro, please let me know if you still have issues. That this is something we're definitely working on and want to get completely resolved. With this new clean import plugin, we're going to be adding additional plugins that do backups that work with us. So right now it's like Backup Buddy, Backup WP, WP Backup, Duplicator, but I know a lot of people use Updraft Plus, and we're looking to make it so that we can use Updraft Plus. So if somebody has that, we can do it. It's difficult because Updraft Plus actually doesn't even create a complete archive. They create just parts of the WordPress website, like plugins and the themes. And then on top of that, they break those out and put them into their own folders. So what we'll need to do on our end is take that Updraft package, unzip all the pieces, put all the pieces in the way we need it to, bring in WordPress, build it all back into a single archive and import it into Desktop Server. So that's what we're working on. So stay tuned for that. That's coming. I also wanted to mention we do import Backup Buddy without too much exception, Backup Buddy and WooCommerce. So if you are using WooCommerce on the site and you create a backup of it with Backup Buddy and you try to import it, there can be a message, a problem. Because of the way WooCommerce does their naming of the tables, the order that the tables come in is incorrect in Backup Buddy. Tables that gets imported is dependent on the other table before it, and it's not being created before it. It comes after, which causes the error. I want to mention that any archive that you cannot import for any reason, please contact us at support and let us know. We would like to look at it. In most cases, we can always send you back an archive that you can use, that you'll be able to import, and we'll explain what we found. Sometimes it's as simple as a bad archive. It might be missing. It's looking for a complete WordPress installation. So sometimes we'll get a archive that doesn't have a database in it. It may not have a WP includes folder. It may be missing or even the WP config may be written differently by some hosts. WP Engine actually totally changes the way the WP config looks and works. And there's a few others out there that do also. So anytime you have trouble importing, we are here for you. Please send that in to us. We'll take a look at it, and we'll most likely resolve the issue with it and send it right back to you.
And sometimes, even though the site might work, the database might have gotten corrupted. So when you go to do the import, that's when it's noticed that the database might be absent. Not necessarily corrupt, but bad in it that it kind of struggles with. Right? You run into that sometimes too, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I want to mention on Windows, there's a big issue with imports. And that is, we realize, and you folks have probably also realized this too, that sites are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, especially with page builders. If your clients are importing large art or MP3s into the site can get huge. And if you download that as a import that on a Windows machine. This doesn't happen on a Mac, but it does happen on a Windows machine. This is a Windows limitation. If the file is over 2 gigabytes, it will fail. It doesn't import correctly. So you may get a notice that says that it can't find an index page. And the solution for that, the way that we kind of deal with that is we will take out the uploads folder that's in your WP content folder. That uploads folder contains all of your assets, usually all your pictures, any kind of PDFs or your audio files or anything like that. Take that out So unzip the archive, take out the uploads folder, rezip it up, and import that into desktop server. It's going to import without any problem because it'll be much smaller now. It'll probably be below the 2 GB issue. It'll go right into desktop server, and then take that uploads folder and put it over, now that your site is created locally, just move that right into your WP content focal site that you've created, and you're good to go. Everything will be working great. There's not a problem when you export the site to deploy it up to the host. We don't run into problems there, but on imports. So watch for that. If you should be on Windows and you happen to get the error where you can't find the index file and you know that the site is quite large, take a look and see if it's over 2 GB. If it is, pull out that uploads folder. It's probably going to solve that problem for you. Go ahead.
Peter asked, if you guys rename htaccess and make changes to my config file on import, what's going to happen when I try to export all my work back to those particular servers?
So because we just rename it, you can redeploy the site back up there, and you could just rename the htaccess file back to the one that's there, back to the way it was. So you could delete the htaccess file that we create and then rename the htaccess that we put the date onto, the save date, and it'll be just like it was when you had it before. Now, actually, we don't replace the htaccess, actually, I don't believe. To be honest with you, I'm not positive on this. I need to verify this. I actually don't think we replace htaccess. When you deploy, we replace all the WordPress files in the database. I don't believe we touch the htaccess file. So if there's already one up there, I believe it's left in place. It's a great question, Peter. I'll look into that to be absolutely positive. I'm pretty sure it's not touched, but I would have to verify that. Is there any other questions about importing?
Peter Raskin,
Peter Sale. Peter Raskin asks, to pull out the uploads folder, you unzip the archive, pull out the folder, and then rezip the install.
That is correct. Absolutely. Unzip it, just pull that out, zip it back up, and then import it into desktop server. After the site is created, wherever you created it at, if you're using our default, which is documents websites, you would go to documents websites and the name of the site, and then into the WP content folder, copy that uploads folder that you might have put on your desktop, right back in, and now you have all your assets back.
And I was going to also say, I would recommend that you use a third-party archive utility like 7-zip or WinRAR rather than the Windows native zip utility, because it will take longer. The Windows native zip utility is extremely slow. No more questions.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move off of import now, and we're going to go to export and deployment. And what we thought we would do is we would show you two different ways to deploy, and this is the 2 different methods that are available. One is called direct deploy, one is called quick deploy. And we want to actually, we want you to see how that works completely live. We're going to do that. We're going to take a site and deploy it up to a host. The host that we're deploying to is a host called anhonesthost.com. That's where we actually host our site. They're actually very, very good. They have no trouble deploying to them, and we're going to show that to you. But before I dive into that, I do want to mention, so when deploying, deployment is kind of one of the thorns in our sides, as we like to say, because of the fact that it's difficult because the hosting world is the wild, wild west. Every single host can do things any way they want to. There's no standards or anything like that across the industry. You probably may have noticed that some hosts use cPanel, some hosts use Plesk. There's lots of custom control panels out there. And the way you connect and deploy to a site can be different for every site. And so we can run into problems, and you can run into problems when deploying a site. And that's why, as a premium user, if you do ever run into a problem, please don't hesitate to contact us. We are always more than happy to do an assisted deployment for you and take that off your plate, something you don't have to deal with. We don't expect you to get stuck and have no way to get the site deployed. We'll take care of that for you. So let's dive into, let me share my screen. So we're going to share. I'm going to go ahead and put that here. And let's come to desktop server. I've created a little site. If we come into remove, I can take a look at the name. I named it deploytest.dev.cc. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a direct deploy. And to do that, I'm going to come to, let's see, that's the wrong tab. Let's come here and come here. So an honest host uses cPanel. And so I've come in and I've created a subdomain. And this is my personal account. So I've named it deploy.gregfranklin.com. So all I did was come into subdomains. And down here, you can go ahead and just type in whatever the subdomain you want it to be. And it's going to attach to whatever your primary is. So you can see down here, deploy.gregfranklin.com. And then the next thing I did is I wanted to add WordPress. There's lots of ways to add WordPress. On most of the cPanel sites, it's very easy. You can come down here to your applications and just say WordPress, and you want to install the application. Click here, and then you pick where you want it to go. So in my case, I said I wanted it on my deploy. So right here, deploy.gregfranklin.com, that's the one I picked. And then you want to watch out for this here. Sometimes it'll ask if you want if you want to be in an optional directory. In most cases, you do not, but a lot of them default to WP. So you'll want to go ahead and get rid of that because ideally you want that to be deployed into the root, not into a subdirectory. There are different directions to deploy into a subdirectory. It's a little more difficult to do that, but we actually do have directions to deploy to a subdirectory. Okay, so I don't have to go through this step because I've already got this site already has that up on the desktop server, already has, I'm sorry, WordPress is already installed up there. So let me go show that to you really quickly. I'm going to actually go right into the admin. And I wanted to show you what you want to install up here for a direct deploy is the desktop server plugin. So all you do is hit add new, and then just do a search for desktop server. It's going to be right there, and then click install and activate. That's all you need. So let's click back here, install plugins. That's the only thing I have active right now. But this could be a site. If you've already got a site up there and it's a full-on site where you've got all the plugins installed, the themes in there, it's okay. Go ahead and install desktop server for WordPress on there, and you can deploy over that existing site if you want to replace that site. Okay, so let's get started on that. I'm going to come back to desktop server. We're now going to go ahead and export. And then I'm going to pick, I'm sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. There we go, export, export or deploy. We're going to pick the site, deploy test, oops, come on, deploy test. And we need to put right here what you're deploying to. And so in this case, we're deploying to deploy.gregfranklin.com. And we're going to direct deploy. When I click direct deploy, it's going to pop up asking for the username and password for this site, the administrator. So we're going to type in the administrator for that. Oh, sorry. And hit OK. And now we're ready to go. I'm going to say next. You can go ahead and encourage your search engine visibility. You can purge posts and pages. And if you wanted to deploy just the database, so maybe you've already got the site up and you've made some small changes locally in desktop server, you've added some pages, you've added some posts, you've added a plugin, you could just deploy, well, actually, if you added a plugin, you would need to deploy the whole thing. But if you were just doing changes to the content or settings, you could deploy only the database. We're going to go ahead and deploy the whole site. I'm going to turn off encourage your search engine because I don't want this site, searched. So I'm going to say next. At this point, it's going to begin scrubbing the files. So it's going to convert that deploy-test.dev.cc to deploy.gregfranklin.com through all the files and the databases. So that's what it's going to do first. Depending on your speed, This is going to determine how quickly the site is going to go up. I'm on a medium connection here, so we'll see. I think it's going to take maybe 8 to 9 minutes to deploy this site. And of course, it depends on how big the site is. And I want to mention, with direct deploy, it does the transportation is over a technology called XMLRPC. So what it's doing is it's basically going to compress this into a small archive, and then it's going to break it into little packets. And it sends all those little packets up to the host, one packet at a time, just sending them up there as fast as it can. And when it gets up there, it assembles them, and then it unzips and it puts the files in the right place and imports the database into place. So that's what it's going to do. And right now, it's beginning to transfer those files up there right now. You can get a message here where it fails, and that could be an error that says something about the XMLRPC. And in those cases, that can be caused by, if the host has blocked XMLRPC, direct deploy is not going to be the solution for you. You might want to use quick deploy at that point, because the XMLRPC can sometimes, to a host, be considered almost like where they're getting hit by an attack, because they see all these little small files coming up. So while this is deploying, now's a good time to go get a cup of coffee. If there's any questions, I can answer that while we're waiting for this to deploy. Like I said, I think it's going to take about probably 8 minutes.
What was it? I don't remember who asked. I think it might have been, Kevin Price asked, how does deployment work with Liquid Web? Have you heard any issue or running it? Have you had to do any deployments to Liquid Web because it wasn't working?
I have done deployments to Liquid Web. I don't remember if there was any issues. I believe we had to use quick deploy, not direct deploy. But I'm not even positive, because Liquid Web is a cloud-based host. I don't remember if we had to do a manual deployment. So a manual deployment, that's really the 3 options that we use. We use direct deploy, quick deploy, or a manual deployment. Manual deployment is when you'll create an archive with desktop server, taking the steps that I'll show you when we do a quick deploy. We'll create an archive, we unzip the archive, and we upload only the WP contents folder, and then we replace the database through phpMyAdmin. That's the fastest way, and it's the way that we can make sure that that gets done. So if we're running into problems with a host, that's one method that we do. But I think Liquid Web, we used quick deploy, and we'll show you how to do that. It's very easy. Nothing hard about it at all. It's just really a different transportation. Direct deploy, as I mentioned, is using XMLRPC. Quick deploy uses FTP or SFTP. But we're doing the same things, just moving files up to the site and then extracting and putting the files in the right places.
Graham asks, what is the question to ask my hosting provider is what he's asking, to see if direct deploy will work. That's actually a good question.
It's a really good question. There's something called file direct. You would want to ask them if they have file direct. Beyond that, you could send it to support who your host is. Hosts do specific things, and we can test against certain hosts. We have relationships with a lot of the hosts, so we know most of them, and we can help with that.
And John was talking about how HostGator gives him problems, and he says his next test is to see if it will do database only deployment.
I actually think he's going to run into a problem with that. I also have trouble with HostGator. HostGator is one of the ones we're actually working on quick deploy right now to smooth out the HostGator one. I'm working with Dave on that. I'm going to be having him assist me on that. It'll get smoother.
And why don't you talk about the database only feature deployment? the part where you can deploy the database only. You have that option in direct.
I mentioned that in direct deploy.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do a database only. Okay. So if you've only made changes to the content and the settings, you don't necessarily, of course, need to send up all the files, which is really the longest part. It takes the longest, is because it's having to transfer, as you can imagine, all your assets, all the images, and those are being copied up over whatever your bandwidth is. So a deployment of the database is very quick. I mean, it's only got the tables to deal with, and those are actually, in most cases, fairly small.
Peter Rashkin says, you haven't mentioned all-in-one WP migration. I think this works for me.
There are lots of other tools to do deployments besides us. Our tools work, but there's other tools that also work. So all-in-one deployment is one of them. There's actually a couple others too. Off the top of my head, I can't think of them, but there are other tools. Even Duplicator and Backup Buddy do have their own tools to do a deployment. So there are lots of resources for doing deployments. Our tools are a little different, and of course they're part of desktop server, so you can use those. And you can always fall back to the fact that you have us as your support. So if you run into a problems of deployment and you just can't spend any more time troubleshooting it, trying to figure it out, that's what we're here for. So send that into us. If you're a premium member, we are here to do an assisted deployment for you. We'll get the job done for you if you are running into problems.
Let's see.
And I guess I should mention, actually, there are a couple hosts that I want to say they're on our bad list. They're on a list that we actually don't recommend these hosts because they actually do things that are not good, and they are definitely not going to work with us. Yeah. And one of them is Network Solutions. Yeah. Network Solutions is a huge company that came about a long time ago when they were predominantly a domain company where they were generating domains and they sold domains. That's what Network Solutions did. They, of course, now do hosting also, but the problem is the way they do their hosting. They currently only allow you to have a WordPress site in a subdirectory. And I mean, even from the domain, that's not a good thing. So they force, and their technology is quite old, and there's some other issues with the way they handle things. They're tough to work with. So if there's one I would recommend staying away with, it'd be Network Solutions. Yahoo.com has a web hosting solution that we cannot work with. Again, really odd structure, really bad solution that we can't work with at all. And it's not even so much that we can't work with it, that WordPress doesn't work well with it. So it's even beyond us, it's the WordPress platform doesn't work well with it.
And then there are some that use, which we don't see so much anymore, but like Windows Server hosts, we don't see that quite as much anymore.
Yeah, we do work with Windows Server. Yeah. GoDaddy still has a Windows solution right now, Windows Server. But WordPress, again, WordPress works best on Linux-based systems. So that's going to be your best fit when it comes to using a WordPress solution.
Peter Sale says, Duplicator complains about my 500 megabyte file size, advising me to upgrade to the pay version. Is an upgrade to the pay version of Duplicator really necessary for a 500 megabyte site?
This is what they suggest. We don't control that, so it's not something we can tell them to do. But you could easily move to a different plugin at that point. Backup WP doesn't have that limitation. I don't think WordPress Backup does. There's just other solutions if you didn't want to use the Duplicator solution. But that's where everybody makes a decision on where their limited version and their premium version goes. And that's where theirs is. They've drawn their line there. I want to mention at this time that we have finished our deployment. If I hit next, it's going to give us the link to go ahead and click on. If we click on that now, we should now see this is the deployment. I know for a fact because this was the The site was set up with the 2017 with the plant that you've seen everywhere, and now you can see the dynamic blueprint.
And since this is live now, anybody could go to that URL right now and check for themselves and see that it's up.
Absolutely.
Until Greg takes it down later today.
So the next thing I want to show you is let's talk about a quick deploy. A quick deploy, we come back to export again, and we hit next. We say export or deploy, and we're going to pick our site, exactly the same steps basically so far. Let's go ahead and say deploy.gregfranklin.com. And now instead of choosing direct deploy, we're going to say export to a website archive. This, by the way, is also the way if you want to send us an archive to review, because you're wanting to, if there's a problem deploying or something like this, this is how you'd make that archive file. So we're going to say next. And it's going to ask you here in this screen for the document root, the DB name, the DB user, the password, and the host. And if you have desktop server installed up on the site, you can click on Fetch Live Hosting Server Details, and it's going to grab that. So let's do that right now. I'm going to add that, but I'm also going to show you another way to do it. So even if you don't do it this way, there's another way. So there's two ways to do this. So let's come back up here. Let's log in. Let's see here. Oh, you know what? It's there we go. So we're going to come over here to plugins. We're going to, you'll look, if we do install new, you're not going to see there's no longer there because we deployed over that entire WordPress installation. So everything is different now. And we need to add our desktop server back in. Away. And let's install it. Activate. Okay, so this is now ready to go. And if I hit fetch, it's going to ask me for the username and password, just like we did with the deployment. Can't type today. And there you go. You see it populated right away with the document root, the database username, the database name, the database username, the database password, and the host. These can be totally different, all based on whatever host you're using. Totally, everything would be totally different each time. So I'm going to say next. It's going to ask you what you want to name this file. You can name it, you can leave it just as it is. I have a tendency to put in deploy at the end here, just so that I know that this file is specifically for deployment. So that's what I do. And this is where it's going to output it. So desktop server always remembers where you are, where you last left off. So in my case, we're in documents websites, and that's fine. I'm going to save it there. You could browse and put it somewhere else if you want to, but this is fine. I'll leave it right there. I'm going to turn off again, encourage search engine. I don't want to encourage the search engine at all. So we're going to go ahead and hit next, and it's going to go ahead and create that archive for me.
And while it's doing that, John Simmons brings up from earlier that there's always WP CLI search and replace too, which of course you can add WP CLI manually into a WordPress installation, or if you have the premium version of desktop server, we have DS CLI, which makes all WP CLI commands compatible, and you can do all of that. I actually use the search replace feature often with DS CLI. Because it handles the scrubbing faster and much better. And actually in a future deployment engine, it will be using CLI commands instead, because it is a little bit more efficient. And let's see. Andy Carter says, Backup Buddy falls on its face almost always for me. And Peter Raskin says the same thing. Now, to both of you, I'm wondering, is that happening when you're importing that it falls back flat on its face? And if so, I'd be kind of curious just to see an archive, just to see why you're having bad luck with it. We actually have pretty good luck with Backup Buddy, so we'd like to help you with that. And we know the guys over at iThemes really well, and they'd probably like to know about it too. We try to, they're pretty good about keeping us in tune with changes they're making so that we can make changes as necessary as well. so that it remains compatible, because we do have overlap with customers, obviously. Let's see. John Simmons says, auto-populating those fields from the plugin, priceless.
It's true. It's true. Okay, so I'm going to move on.
Okay.
So here you can see after I clicked next, it shows us where the archive was created, and I've gone to that in File Explorer here. So here's my archive, ready to go. So this file contains a complete WordPress installation, including databases and your and it's been all scrubbed, so it now has the correct paths for all the domains. Sometimes if you unzip this, if you were to ever unzip it and look at it, you may find that there will be like a database 1, a database 2, a database 3, and you're like, wait a minute, why are there all these databases? It's because Desktop Server breaks the databases into smaller chunks, again, because some web hosts, when deploying, can't handle larger chunks. So that's why we split those up, and that's why that occurs. So now we have this archive. Now we've got, instead of using XMRPC to upload it, we're going to use FTP or SFTP, or I want to show you, you can come in, if you're on a web host that has a control panel, you could always come back to the control panel and go into the file manager. And in the file manager, you can come in and find the site. In this case, you can see Deploy Greg Franklin is right here. And there is the existing site. And we could upload that file, that archive, through the file manager right in here. Would be one way. Okay. The other way is we could, if you have an FTP client like FileZilla, or what's some other ones? On Mac, there's Coda or Transmit. Anything like that, you could come in and connect via that. So I've got my credentials in here for Greg Franklin, and if I hit connect, there we are. So we can see right there that same thing that we see over here. So either way, you could transfer the file up. I think at this point, I'm going to transfer through the cPanel just so you can see that happen. So I'm just going to click on upload. And I'm going to say select a file, and now we're just going to browse to where we know it is, which is in the websites folder. And we're going to come down and let's see, deploygregfranklin.com right there. I'm going to hit open. And this is going to begin uploading. Now, as I mentioned, this can be much faster, which is why we actually use quick deploy more than we do direct deploy. Look at that. We have the entire archive up there right now. So done very quickly. Now, the only thing else we need to include is the quick deploy script. And the quick deploy script is located on Windows. It's in your C exam lite folder. So I'm going to run over here and grab that, quickdeploy.php, and hit open. On a Mac, that is in your applications example folder. So go ahead and deploy that. It's very tiny. You can see that it went up there really quickly. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this name of the archive, because that we're going to need. I'm going to come back over to our site, and we're going to type in quick deploy.php, enter. And you're going to see this form, this kind of scary form that says, warning, this website will be erased, because it's going to go ahead and deploy this archive over the top of your existing site. So it's it tells you here what it's going to do, and all we need to do is drop in the name of that archive into this field, and we're going to say deploy. And it's going to ask you, are you sure? For sure. And it's going to go ahead and be, right now what it's doing up on the server, and it's all done. It's that quick. So that's one of the reasons we really like the quick deploy. It's very fast. If you get a chance to try that out, you're going to like it. Something else you can do is come back to the file, your file manager, and if you reload the page, if you scroll to the bottom, you're going to see a log text file. We write a little file at the bottom to see if everything went the way it was supposed to. So let's view that. So you can see here, it's going to tell us that it's detected things, it's found a wp-config file, it started the database import, it processed it, it ran through the files to make sure that it got all the databases, and then at the very end, done processing file. This is what you're looking for. You want to make sure that says that. If it says that, you know that the site has deployed correctly. I wanted to show you one other thing. So when we did the the quick deploy. Let's come back here. Deploy test. Oops. If we did not have a WordPress site installed, and we didn't have the desktop server plugin installed, and we could not fetch the live hosting, there is still a way to get this information. And that is a little script called getDB info. And you can find that up on GitHub. If you go to GitHub ServerPress, there is a getDB info, should be there. It'll be there by the end of this day. I apologize, for some reason it's not showing up. But it is a little script that you can upload to the site. And if you then visit it, just like we did with Quick Deploy, there's the information we need. So you can simply copy that and drop it in. And by the way, most hosts name the database and the database user the same. So you'll be able to just, in this case, paste it twice.
And it's almost always localhost, but not
yes, on the DB host, it's almost always.
Kevin asked earlier, and I think he answered, but I'm going to ask again. When importing a website that uses security plugin, cache plugin, etc., is it best to disable or delete those plugins before creating the backup archive?
Ideally, it would be nice if they were not in the archive, but if you're pulling down from a live site, we understand that those are probably installed, and that's where you want to use the clean import plugin because it's going to deactivate those. Okay, so at this point, that is everything regarding doing deployments, unless people have questions.
John says he actually did get Quick Deploy to run on HostGator, but had to run it about 4 times and always got an error.
If it's a 50X error, it's like a 502 or a 504 error, that's something that's difficult for us to take care of. That's on their end, and it's usually a timeout. So they run PHP just like we're running PHP on our local systems. That PHP has an execution time up on the server. And of course, they don't want their servers running and processing stuff all the time. So they have sometimes a very short timeout. And if you're, in this case, if your site is larger and you're deploying it and then you're asking it to process the files and deploy them, that's all the process power on them, they can time out on you. Now what's cool is if you rerun the quick deploy script, so when we were doing that quick deploy, we're doing this, oops, yeah, we've already replaced the file, so it's not gonna be there. Give me a second here, I'm gonna put it back. Let's select. When the site is done deploying, it removes the quick deploy script from your site. Okay, so now if I come back and quick deploy, why am I not seeing a quick deploy? Did I not upload it to the templates? Let's look.
Robert, in answer to your question, is quick deploy quicker than a manual deployment? The answer is probably
no. Wouldn't you say no?
Well, then a manual deployment where you FTP all, it depends. If you FTP up the zip file and then decompress, it's probably
fast.
It's probably about the same, I'd say. It's just easier. So for people who don't want to mess with doing the database import and all that stuff, Quick Deploy handles all that for you. So it's just more like a one quick step or two quick steps, as opposed to having to, put the file up there, unzip it via cPanel, and then import the database and do all that. That involves a little bit more manual intervention. So I don't know that it's a huge time saver as much as it is a step saver. How does that sound? I actually like Quick Deploy quite a bit, but sometimes you do have to do it you have to go with the manual deployment. John asks if desktop server will ever be able to sync deltas in the future. In other words, not obliterate new posts.
Right now, we use the tool WP SiteSync, which is our plugin.
Right.
And
you've seen Dave pop in the chat a few times, and Dave is the architect behind WP SiteSync.
And WP SiteSync is more of a surgical tool. Right. It allows you to deploy pages, posts from local or even live or staging servers to a live site, and it doesn't touch anything else. And so that would do that. It's very difficult to do a comparison between a live and local, which is what would be required to do a sync, basically a sync where it's only going to deploy the things that have changed. There's been many attempts, many attempts in the WordPress community to create something like this. And there's not been a lot of success. It's just so difficult because there's serialized arrays, there are IDs that are getting associated with posts and assets and all those kinds of things. So there's just so many moving parts that it's difficult to do that. So that's why we've gone toward using something like WP SiteSync, where we can control, actually, I should say the user that uses WP SiteSync can control what they want to push and pull between the live and local sites, or staging a live site. You guys get to decide what you want to push and pull, and it works great. It's more surgical. And it's a great point, because things like WooCommerce sites, where you have products that have reviews and they have orders and comments and things like that. You don't want to disrupt those, but yet you want to be able to make changes to adding products and things like that. And that's where something like WP SiteSync is a great tool for that. I hope that answered your question.
And I think we've answered all the questions that have come in so far.
Awesome.
Are there any last questions before we wrap things up? And Steve just came in. So we have everybody. You have everybody here right now. You have Steve, you have Dave, you have Greg, you have me.
And you can ask us anything. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can ask us anything, even personal questions.
My favorite color is blue.
All right. I think we are getting
I guess we should mention one other thing. Is WP SiteSync does work with Gutenberg, and I know that is the thing everybody's talking about right now. I just had a meetup last night. Gutenberg was the discussion, the entire thing. They talked all about Gutenberg. I do have a blueprint up on our GitHub where you can actually download a blueprint that sets up Gutenberg for you very easily. It installs the latest version of Gutenberg. It installs the Gutenberg theme. It installs a little plugin that creates a testimonial block. So if you want to play with Gutenberg yourself without touching it on a live site, download that, install it, play with it. I mean, that's desktop server's big strengths are the fact that it's a playground for you guys. It's where you can test and try things. And what better to test right now than Gutenberg, because we're all going to be seeing it soon.
That's right. And once again, the other advantage with us is that we really are big on trying to support our customers. So we like to think of ourselves as the extra teammate when you're doing a project. So if you do run into any issues, we want to know about them, and let us know. And I think that's about it. The only other thing I would say is if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do, because we're going to be doing this every week, and you'll be getting announcements when we do, and when we have new content, like new tutorial videos and things like that, it will show up in your inbox, and hopefully they're all designed to help you make your workflow better. So anything that you need, feel free to contact us, and we will be back next week. We're going to cover more tips and troubleshooting next week. And if you have anything you'd like to add to the list, please send it to us. And if you have any ideas for shows, we're always open to that as well. So with that, thank you very much.
Bye.
And have a great day.